The ballroom glittered like a galaxy brought down to earth, crystal chandeliers casting warm, golden light over polished marble floors so reflective they seemed almost liquid. Every surface shimmered. Every detail whispered money. Waiters in white gloves moved like ghosts between clusters of guests, balancing trays of champagne flutes and delicate hors d'oeuvres, their presence barely acknowledged by the people they served. Conversations floated through the air in low, confident tones: mergers, acquisitions, percentages, influence. Laughter came easily here, but it was the kind that always seemed calculated, sharpened at the edges. This wasn't a room for warmth. It was a room for positioning. At the far end, near a tall window that framed the city skyline in glittering blues and whites, stood a man who didn't seem to fit the rhythm of it all. His suit was charcoal gray, neat but unremarkable. It lacked the sharp tailoring and bold confidence of the designer pieces worn by most of the guests. His shoes were clean, polished with care rather than expense. In his hand, he held a simple glass of sparkling water, the tiny bubbles rising quietly to the surface. Daniel Hale stood still, but not uncertain. There was nothing hesitant about him. His posture was relaxed, his shoulders steady, his gaze moving calmly across the room as if he were studying it, not admiring it. People passed by him constantly, brushing close enough that he could catch fragments of their conversations, the scent of expensive cologne, the rustle of silk and satin. Yet no one stopped. No one looked twice. To them, he was invisible, another forgettable attendee who had somehow slipped past the threshold. Daniel didn't seem to mind. He turned slightly, watching as a group near the center of the room burst into laughter. The sound carried, louder than the rest, confident in its right to be heard. At the center of that group stood Victor Langford. Victor had presence, the kind that demanded attention without asking for it. His suit was perfectly tailored, his silver cufflinks catching the light each time he gestured. He held a glass of red wine like it was an extension of himself, swirling it lazily as he spoke. 600 million, Victor said, his voice smooth and assured. And they're still trying to negotiate terms like they have options. The people around him leaned in, drawn by his confidence. A woman in a sleek black dress tilted her head, smiling. Whoever owns that company must be under pressure. No one drags a deal this long unless they're desperate. Another man chuckled. Or inexperienced. Probably some back office type who got lucky. Victor smirked, clearly enjoying the attention. Doesn't matter. By tomorrow, it's ours. And whoever's behind it will be lucky we even let them stay involved. The group laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. From across the room, Daniel watched them without expression. He lifted his glass slightly, the movement slow, thoughtful, and took a small sip. The carbonation fizzed quietly against his tongue. His eyes lingered on Victor for a moment longer, as if memorizing something. Then he glanced at his watch. 8:42 p.m. Plenty of time. He exhaled softly and pushed himself away from the window, moving into the flow of the crowd. His steps were unhurried, deliberate, weaving easily between clusters of conversation. He passed a table where two men argued in hushed tones about valuation metrics, a woman laughing too loudly at something that clearly wasn't funny, a pair of assistants nervously checking their phones. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. Why would they? He reached the bar, setting his glass down gently. The bartender gave him a brief glance, already turning to serve someone else before Daniel could say anything. It didn't bother him. He simply rested his fingertips on the polished surface, waiting. Behind him, another wave of laughter broke out, closer this time. Daniel turned slightly. Three men stood a few feet away, their ties loosened just enough to signal confidence rather than carelessness. Their faces were flushed, their movements a fraction too loose. The kind of men who thrived in rooms like this, feeding off the energy, mistaking noise for importance. One of them noticed Daniel looking. Hey, he said, stepping forward with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. You look a little out of place, don't you? The other two smirked, exchanging glances. Daniel met his gaze evenly. Do I? Yeah, another added, circling slightly as if inspecting him. This isn't exactly a walk-in event. You sure you're in the right room? Their tone wasn't curious. It was amused, predatory, in a casual sort of way. Daniel didn't move. I'm exactly where I need to be. Something in his voice, quiet, certain, hung in the air for a moment. It should have been enough. But the men only laughed. Relax, the first one said, lifting his glass of red wine. We're just messing with you. He took a half step closer, invading Daniel's space. The scent of alcohol was unmistakable now. Seriously though, he went on, tilting his head, who invited you? Daniel didn't answer. The silence seemed to irritate them more than any response could have. Whatever, the second man muttered. Let's not waste time. The third one chuckled, raising his glass slightly. Here, welcome to the party. It happened quickly. A misstep, a shift of weight, or maybe not an accident at all. The glass tipped forward. Deep red wine arced through the air and splashed across Daniel's chest, soaking into the fabric of his jacket. The stain spread almost instantly, dark and uneven, dripping slowly toward the floor. For a moment, everything felt still. Then the laughter hit. Whoa, did you see that? Man, that's expensive. Well, maybe not that expensive. Guess you'll need a new suit. Their voices overlapped, delighted with themselves. Daniel looked down at his jacket. The wine clung to the fabric, heavy and damp. A drop slid from the edge of his sleeve and hit the marble floor with a soft, almost inaudible sound. He reached up calmly, adjusting his cuff as if nothing unusual had happened. Then he lifted his head. His eyes met theirs again. No anger, no embarrassment, just a steady, quiet stillness that didn't match the situation at all. Are you finished? He asked. The question caught them off guard for a split second. Then one of them snorted. Or what? Daniel held his gaze. Something shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible. Not in them, in him. He gave a small nod, as if confirming a thought that had just settled into place. Yes, he said softly. I think you are. Without another word, he stepped past them. They didn't stop him. They didn't even try. Behind him, their laughter resumed, louder than before, fueled by the absence of consequences. Daniel walked steadily through the crowd, the stain on his jacket drawing a few brief glances now, but still no one approached him. No one asked. No one cared. Near the edge of the room, he paused for just a moment. His gaze drifted once more toward Victor Langford and his circle, still laughing, still celebrating a deal they believed was already theirs. Daniel watched them in silence. Then he turned and walked toward a side exit, disappearing quietly from the ballroom. Behind him, the music played on. By 9:15 p.m., the ballroom no longer felt like a place for idle conversation. The energy had tightened, sharpened, drawn toward a single expectation that pulsed beneath the surface of every interaction. The laughter was quieter now, more controlled. Glasses were refilled more slowly. Phones appeared discreetly in hands, screens lighting up faces as messages were checked and rechecked. Something important was about to happen, and everyone in the room could feel it. Near the front, a stage had been prepared, subtle but unmistakably central. A wide screen glowed softly behind it, displaying the sleek, minimalist logo of the company at the heart of the night's negotiations. The name alone carried weight. It had been circulating through financial circles for months, whispered in boardrooms and debated in private meetings. A $600 million deal was no small matter, and whoever controlled it would shift the balance of power in more ways than one. Victor Langford stood just a few steps from the stage, surrounded by his inner circle. His confidence hadn't dimmed, in fact, it seemed to have grown sharper, more defined, like a blade honed to perfection. He adjusted his cufflinks, glancing briefly at his reflection in the darkened surface of a nearby panel. This is it, he said, his voice low but certain. They've dragged it out long enough. One of his associates nodded eagerly. Once this goes through, there's no catching up to us. Victor allowed himself a small smile. There already isn't. A few feet away, the trio from earlier lingered, their earlier amusement now replaced with anticipation. The man who had spilled the wine shifted his weight slightly, glancing around the room. You think the owner's actually going to show? He asked. Victor didn't even look at him. He'll show, he said. They always do at the end. That's when they want to feel important. The others chuckled softly. Across the room, guests began to drift closer to the stage, forming a loose semicircle. Conversations faded into murmurs, then into near silence as a man in a dark suit stepped onto the platform and adjusted the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice amplified just enough to carry without effort, thank you for joining us this evening. Polite applause followed, brief and measured. As you know, tonight marks the final stage of negotiations for one of the most significant acquisitions of the year. More applause, slightly louder this time. Victor folded his arms loosely, his posture relaxed, his gaze fixed on the stage with quiet satisfaction. Before we proceed with the formal announcement, the host continued, we would like to invite the owner and CEO of the company in question to say a few words. A ripple moved through the crowd, subtle, electric. Victor leaned slightly toward one of his associates, his voice barely above a whisper. Let's see who's been hiding behind all that paperwork. Near the back of the room, a side door opened. At first, no one paid much attention. It was just another movement in a room full of them. Then a figure stepped through. The lighting shifted as he moved forward, the soft glow from the chandeliers catching the clean lines of a dark, perfectly tailored suit. His pace was unhurried, his posture unchanged from earlier, calm, composed, almost detached. Daniel Hale. For a heartbeat, the room didn't react. Recognition doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it begins as a quiet fracture in certainty. A woman near the front frowned slightly, her eyes narrowing. One of Victor's associates straightened, his expression flickering with confusion. The trio from earlier went still, their earlier confidence draining in an instant as memory caught up with reality. Victor's smile didn't disappear all at once. It faltered, just enough to reveal the first crack. "Number," someone whispered under their breath. Daniel stepped fully into the light. His jacket was different now, dark, immaculate, tailored to perfection. There was no trace of the earlier stain, no visible sign of what had happened, but something else had changed, something less tangible and far more significant. The room saw him now. Not as background, not as an afterthought, as the center. He reached the stage without hesitation, ascending the steps with quiet ease. The host stepped aside immediately, offering a respectful nod that hadn't been there for anyone else that evening. Daniel adjusted the microphone slightly, his gaze sweeping across the room, not searching, not uncertain, but deliberate. "Good evening," he said. His voice carried effortlessly, steady and clear. "I appreciate your patience." Silence settled over the crowd, heavy and complete. "I apologize for my brief absence," he continued. "I had a minor incident earlier." A few scattered laughs surfaced, thin, uncertain, quickly fading. Daniel's eyes moved through the audience, then stopped. Victor Langford. The connection landed like a weight. The man who had spilled the wine looked as if the floor had shifted beneath him. His grip tightened around his glass, knuckles whitening. One of his companions took a half step back without realizing it. Victor forced a smile, stepping forward slightly. "Mr. Hale, I." Daniel raised a hand. The gesture was small. It was absolute. "No," he said calmly. "You've already said enough tonight." The words didn't need to be loud. They carried anyway. A murmur spread through the crowd, low and restless. Victor's expression hardened, but there was something else beneath it now, something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Daniel turned his attention back to the room. "The deal we've been discussing," he said, "has been described in many ways over the past few months." He paused briefly, letting the silence stretch just enough. Ambitious, strategic, transformational. A few heads nodded instinctively. "But for me," he continued, "it was always something much simpler." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim folder, holding it loosely at his side. "It was a question." The room leaned in, almost imperceptibly. "Not about valuation," Daniel said. "Not about leverage." His gaze shifted again, briefly touching Victor and his group before returning to the audience as a whole. "A question of partnership." The word lingered. "Of trust," he added. "Of character." The silence deepened. "And tonight," he said quietly, "I received my answer." Victor took a step forward, his composure slipping. "This is ridiculous. You can't base a decision like this on." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This," he said, cutting through the interruption with effortless precision, "is exactly what a decision like this should be based on." Victor stopped. For the first time that evening, he had nothing ready to say. Daniel opened the folder, glancing down briefly before closing it again. "With that in mind," he said, "I am withdrawing from all negotiations with Langford Capital, effective immediately." The reaction was immediate. Gasps. Whispers. A sharp intake of breath from somewhere near the front. Victor's face drained of color. "You're making a mistake." Daniel met his gaze evenly. "No," he said. "I'm correcting one." The words landed harder than any raised voice could have. "And," Daniel continued, turning slightly to address the room again, "I'm pleased to announce that we have finalized an agreement with another firm." The tension shifted, snapping into a new shape. One that demonstrated something far more valuable than numbers. He paused, just for a moment. Respect. The applause began hesitantly, as if people were unsure whether they were witnessing a victory or a collapse. Then it grew. Stronger. Louder. Irreversible. Victor stood motionless, the sound washing over him without meaning. Around him, his associates exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier confidence dissolving into something brittle and uncertain. The man with the wine glass lowered it slowly, as if afraid to draw attention to himself. Daniel stepped back from the microphone. The moment was over. The decision had been made. But as the room surged with new energy, people recalculating, repositioning, shifting their loyalties in real time, Daniel remained untouched by it. He descended the stage the same way he had approached it, quiet, composed, steady. No triumph. No hesitation. Just certainty. And as he walked past the crowd, no one laughed. No one looked away. This time, everyone watched.